So thank you for having me here. I'm going to present joint work with Nano, who's here, and Kawe. We're 3 PhD candidates now, I hope, at the Econ department, just across the street. And we're very excited to be able to present our work. So this is very, very preliminary, so any feedback is more than welcome. So the main motivation of our project is that usually when we think about economic development, it's usually coupled with a rising demand for skilled labor. And what we observed that happened in Latin America in the last 15 years is that there was a huge and rapid expansion of the higher education system. When we compare gross enrollment rates from 2000 and 2013, we observed more than 100% increase, from 21% to 43%. And in this expansion, there's been one sector who has played a special role, which is the private sector. So what happens? Usually when you have economies that are poor, that are emerging, they don't have a lot of state capacity, they don't have a lot of resources, so the privates play a key role. And what we observe that has happened in Latin America is that more than 50%, in more than half of the countries, more than 50% of total enrollment in universities are studying in private institutions. An extreme case is Chile, where I'm from, where 90% are studying in a private institution. And another extreme is Brazil, where you're all guys from. 75% of students are in a private institution. And governments has also played a role here. What's their role? They have catalyzed growth through facilitating access to credit and providing state guarantees loans and fellowships to these students to attend these institutions. So although we have had very large expansions in equity in terms of access to university, there are concerns about quality. So what do we mean by quality? Quality is something that in higher education we cannot really observe, and that we think that it varies substantially across different programs. And since it's not really observed, then institutions and programs may have the wrong incentives. For example, an institution might want to invest money not in increasing the quality of the program, but instead of in paying for advertisement. And this might be especially important for students who are at the lower end of the distribution. We might think that maybe the returns of attending a private institutions the average returns of attending a private institutions are positive. But the question we're going to have is, what happened with these students who are at the lower end of the distribution? It could be the case that they may not be benefiting from higher education as previous generations did. Why? Because they're going to be attending degrees that are of very low quality. They're paying disproportionately high prices. And then when we try to compute degrees, this can even be negative. This is what we think happened in Chile. In Chile, as I mentioned before, we had 90% of students attending private institutions. And in 2011, we have the largest protest in our history. Around more than 500,000 people went to the street to protest. And they were complaining about loans they got to attend university that they were not able to pay. They were not only complaining about the loans they were getting, but they were also complaining about the profits these universities were making. And as I said, these protests were huge. So what is going to be our research question in this setting is, does an increased privatization of the higher education system come at the expense of program quality? We're going to divide this big question into sub-specific questions, which are going to be, what are the coastal average effects of attending higher education? And second, how do these labor market payoffs vary by program quality? We're going to address these two big questions. We're in the context of Brazil, where, as you all know, the higher education sector has suffered one of the largest expansions in the world in the last 20 years. And most of this expansion has been completely driven by the entrance of private institutions. And then once we compute the average returns to degrees, we're going to be specifically interested in comparing private against public institutions, and then private for-profit against private non-for-profit. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be trying to estimate returns to education. What is it complicated? Because of the endogeneity concerns. What is endogeneity? Endogeneity, in this case, is going to be that, for example, Leo, if he wants to attend the university, he might have some special characteristics. Maybe he's super smart, he's good looking. And all those things that moved Leo to go to university might also affect how he performs in the labor market. And it's going to be very hard to separate these two things apart. So what are we going to do? We're going to exploit two different natural experiments that provide us with exogenous variation, where in the university entrance exam, NA. We're gonna study two policies that randomly assign to students different examinations book, and these examinations book are gonna place the questions in different order. So the students who are gonna get the easy questions at the end are gonna be harmed because they're not gonna be able to get the points of these easy questions. And at the same time, you're gonna exploit the assignment of exam graders. In an A, in the last part of the exam, you need to write an essay. And that essay is assigned to be graded to different persons. This is a random assignment. And these people, these graders, are going to vary in how strict or how lenient are with people. And that's going to derive in differences, in random differences in scores. We're going to observe then that these random differences in score are going to translate in differences in college attainment and college quality. And then we're going to exploit the random variation to understand what are the labor market payoffs to college education. We're going to also use rich administrative data, as we all know you have in Brazil. And the idea is to estimate the returns for the whole Brazilian economy. So data, what data we're going to have? We're going to have an A, per most of you took an A. We're going to have microdata. It's going to be basically a list of everyone who's taken an A from 2009 to 2015. We're going to have the scores of everyone. We're going to have an identifier who was the grader, also the exam form, the examination form, and at the same time we're going to have a lot of different socioeconomic questions that students have to answer before they take the exam. We also have access to the university census. This is going to be basically a list of every student who is in the higher education sector, where they're studying, when they started, their degrees, where they have switched or not, and also again some socioeconomic questions. Finally, we're going to match this data with RISE. RISE is a match employer-employee administrative data, and it covers most of the Brazilian formal labor market. And we're going to be able to track people over time to see where they're working and how much they're earning. So what's going to be the roadmap of the talk? First, I'm going to provide you with a little bit of context of the Brazilian higher education sector. Then I'll talk a little bit about this expansion I mentioned before in the introduction. Then I'm going to present the framework on how we're thinking of estimating returns to higher education. We don't really have results yet, as you will see. And finally, if we have time, we're going to present some ideas for future work exploiting assignment of financial aid. So the sector of Brazil. Brazil basically has three different types of universities. They're going to have federal universities, state universities. These two are going to be public. And they're going to have private institutions. As I mentioned before, private institutions account for 75% of the total share of students. And they have a very large number of institutions, of around 2,000. And at the same time, we're not only going to have the division by sector, but also the division by type of institutions. We're going to have university-like institutions, which is what you have in your mind when you think of a university. And at the same time, we're going to have facultades. What are going to be facultades? Facultades are going to be small professional colleges that have a narrower array of degrees and won't have a special focus on research.
This total there is like 1,000?
Sorry?
107 is 107,000?
This number here?
Yes. What is that?
Sorry, so this is the number of students in millions.
Okay.
So this is going to be 4.8 millions in the private sector. And this in total is going to be around 1.6 million in the public sector. And institutions are going to be just as a number. So they're going to be 107 federal universities, 120 state universities, and around 2,000 private institutions. And when we do the breakdown by type, which is university or college-like, most of them are going to be college-like or facultades. So what's special about this setting? First, most degrees in public institutions are going to be virtually for free. People can attend. They don't pay anything. There are going to be very large difference in quality across these institutions, as you probably know. And finally, the most common shift is at night. Basically, 70% of students in Brazil study after 7 p.m. And this is a feature that is very common across Latin American countries, but doesn't really apply to the US. So the expansion. The expansion in the higher education sector has been driven basically by two big facts. First, in 1997, they passed a law that simplified the participation of private institutions. And as a result, in 2015, 75% of students are attending a private institution. And second, the government has been facilitating access to credit. How? There are two big policies. The first one is FIES. It was implemented in 2010. This is a huge policy. They account for like 30% of the total budget of the Ministry of Education. And these are going to be state-guaranteed loan at a rate of 6%. And ProUni, which are going to provide fellowships for students to attend only private institutions, and it was started in 2005. As a result, what we have, around 60% of incoming students in 2015 were studying with either FIES or ProUni.
See, but what's the typical student of higher education in Brazil? It's a guy that finished like the high school and went to university, or it's a guy that was working for a while and decided to use these programs to enter a university and boost their job career, you know? Like.
So when students take an A, they're asked, where are you coming from? Are you coming straight from school, or did you study or work before? I don't remember the exact shares, but I would say like 1/3 of students are coming straight from high school, and all the rest are where you're either working or where you're studying something else before. So the average students is hard to tell because it's going to be very heterogeneous. It's not like the US where most people come straight out of college, straight out of high school, they go to college. In Brazil, it's going to be a very broad combination of people coming from high school and people coming from other higher education institutions, or people coming straight out from their job. So it's going to be a very varied mix.
Even in the US.
Not in the US?
High percentage of students are older.
Yeah, so don't think of a student who is 18. In our sample, we might have some students who are 25, 30 even.
But you can enter in a private institution without taking the name, for example, right?
You can.
Yeah.
You can.
But you cannot get this program.
But you cannot get these programs. Yeah. Okay, so let me show you in data what really happened in the expansion of the higher education system in Brazil. So in a nutshell, what happened? We're going to have new students. What do I mean with new students? In 1997, before this law was passed, we have around 2 million people, and then it goes to 6.5 in 2015. This is how the trends look like. On the x-axis, I'm going to have time. On the y-axis, I'm going to have the number of spots for new incoming students. And as we see, it's sort of very flat until 1997, and then after this law was passed, it takes off. Here in 2010, this line is for the introduction of FIES, and here, this is 2012 for the introduction of Census, the centralized admission system. And as we can see, basically, most of the takeoff is completely driven by spots in private institutions. It's not only going to be new students, but it's also going to be new degrees. The number of degrees that were offered increased from 6,000 in 1997 to around 35,000 in 2015. How that's going to look like? Very similar pattern. This is the number of total degrees. A degree is basically going to be law at PUC, that's going to be 1 degree. Law at the University of Sao Paulo is going to be a different degree. And the number of degrees are going to be around 3,000 steadily. They're going to be sort of flat until 1997, and then again taking off very fast, mostly in the private sector. And finally, it's not only that they're going to have new degrees, new institutions are going to enter the market. How does this look like? Basically, this is going to be a graph that on the x-axis is going to show the year that a new institution entered, and this is the number of institutions that enter in that certain year. In 1915, we're gonna put all the institutions that are entered before this date together, so that's why we have some sort of benching here. And then year by year, we see sort of a smooth increase around the 70s. A lot of new institutions entered. And what happened in 1997 after this law was passed, this is what happened. This is the amount of new institutions that entered the market after the law that simplified the participation of private was passed. So let's try to understand a little bit more who are these.
But a new institution means like a new company opening or like a new campus?
A new university. It's called.
Like
If Book reopens a new campus, that's not an institution.
Okay.
The campus is owned by a different company, then yeah, that's an institution.
So new institutions considered a completely new entity, not a new campus?
Completely new entity, not new campus, yeah. Completely new entity. So let's break it down. When we break it down by private or public, basically most of the entry is by private institutions. There's a little bit of public institutions opening in this period, but it's not even comparable to the number of private institutions that were open. And now when we focus only in the private institutions, we're going to do a split by non-profit and by profit. And we see that they're sort of they are similar, and there's barely more profit institutions entering the market. And finally, when we do the breakdown by type of institutions, as I mentioned before, facultades, these are small colleges against university-like institutions, we're going to observe that most are going to be facultades. This is consistent with the law that was passed that simplified the participation of privates. And what's going to be the result of all this? We're going to have a lot of heterogeneity in the quality of these institutions. This is going to be a quality index. It's measured by the Ministry of Education. It's called the CPC, a curso, I don't know the acronym, but it basically it's a mix of infrastructure, the number of professors you have, whether they have master's or PhD degrees, the NA scores of your students, and the NADE exit scores. And what we observe is that basically there's a big heterogeneity in quality across sectors. So the best universities are going to be federal universities. The second best are going to be state universities. And the worst universities are going to be basically the private universities. This bump here, I think, is kind of interesting. And what happened here in this period of time? In 2010, FIES was passed. And institutions, if they wanted to be eligible for FIES, they needed to be above certain minimum level of quality. And you can manipulate that quality. How? You can do a new building, you can hire more teachers. And that's what probably happened during these 2 years. Universities wanted to be eligible for FIES, they improved their quality, and they received funds from the state.
They passed the law that earlier on that you had to have 15% PhDs
Yeah.
in the institution, and I think what happened is, and that counts in the IDP score.
So that law varies. So that law is only specific for universities. For Centro Universitario, it's a 30%.
Not for facultades.
It's not for facultades. For facultades, I think you have a minimum number of professors with masters required.
But it might have taken them a while to get there. So their scores went up.
Exactly, could have gone up by that as well. I think it might be an interesting research question for the future, but
it would be nice
we're
to
not
show
addressing
like the standard deviation of this quality.
Yeah.
You know, like, because here we are looking at the between quality difference, but
yeah. I can send you data. You can play with it if you want. Okay, so I explain you the context. I show you what happened in this sector. Basically, a lot of new institutions entering, and now the plan is to measure the returns of these new institutions. What's going to be our framework? Basically, the direct way of measuring returns to education is to compare people who attend the university to people who didn't attend university. But as I mentioned before, this strategy is clouded by selection bias concerns. What are these biases? If you attend the university, you have a lot of different characteristics that make you different from someone who didn't attend university. And these differences are going to be observed. For example, I can see your gender, maybe I can see your cognitive ability because I have some sort of like standardized score of you. that there are going to be many unobserved characteristics that I cannot correct for. So even if I do OLS or like matching, we won't fully address these concerns. So what's the ideal solution? The ideal solution is a randomized control trial when I assign some people to go to their preferred degrees, and some other people are going to be my control group that are, and I don't allow them to go to college. Obviously, that's not possible. So what do? We exploit two different natural experiments that randomly increase the scores of some students in the university entrance exam, NM, and we think that that lead to plausible random differences in college access and degree quality. So let me give you a little bit of a preview of NM, and then we're gonna jump into our identification strategy. So NM is the Brazilian National High School exam. It was created in 1998. It was originally for measuring quality of high schools. It started in 2009. It's not only used for that, but it's also used for SISU, the centralized admission mechanisms for public universities, and also for assigning scholarships, ProUni, and loans. And also some private universities use these scores for their own admissions. So before 2009, it was a low stakes exam. After 2009, it's a very high stakes exam. As you probably all know, students really prepare for this. High schools advertise themselves with the NA scores. Some students, for example, as Kawe's brother, they take basically a full leap year in order to study for this exam. So what are we going to do? We basically going to have random variation on which booklet you got and which grader you were assigned to. That's going to be random, completely random. This is going to affect the score you get. We're going to call that the zero stage. Then we're going to capture that variation, and we're going to use it to try to understand random differences in the education you obtained. That's what we're going to call the first stage. And finally, we're going to capture the random movements in education to understand what's the effect of that on wages. That's going to be our second stage. In this talk here, we're going to, since we haven't merged our data to RISE yet, we won't have results on wages, but we are going to walk you through our random shock on booklet and graders, how that impacted scores, and how that impacted education. So zero stage one. Zero stage one, I refer to random variation in the examination booklet. So in A, you basically take it during over a weekend. In the first day, you're going to take history and science. The second day, you're going to take math and language. And in order to prevent cheating, they create 4 different forms. And when you get to a room, students are organized by the first letter of their names, and then they're assigned to a form. So say we all came to this examination room, we're going to have 4 colors, and the idea is that you have a different form to everyone who is sitting right next to you. The assignment of these books is going to be random, as I mentioned already. So how can we think of this? We can think within each room, we can have one experiment where we randomize which book you got. So it's like a stratified randomized control trial. What's going to be the only difference across these books is going to be the order of the questions. So here we have 2 books. We have the blue book, we have the yellow book, or amarello. And as we observe, they have the exact same questions, but the blue book is going to have these questions with these bars in position 136, and Amarillo is going to have it in position 141. And what are the effects of that? The effects of that is that we're going to observe a huge disparity in scores across different examinations books. So let me walk you through this graph. In this y-axis, we have the distance to the average score across all the books in standard deviations. For example, here, the yellow book in 2009 was very close to the average score of all the different books. But here in 2012, the blue book was way below the average. If the books were all the exact same, then we should observe only zeros. What we observe basically here is that students with the blue book are performing way worse than students with the gray book. and that's puzzling. Why? Because the assignment of this book is completely random. So students that got the blue book are completely the same as students who got the gray book. I can show you later, but the thing is what is happening is that students with this book are getting the easy questions at the end of the exam. And if you're racing against the clock, you don't have time to finish the exam. You won't have time to address those questions. So the easy questions, you won't get the points. And that's where we see most of the effect. We don't see any effect for the hard questions because most people get them wrong. But for the easy questions that these guys got them at the end, then that affect their scores. And this is...
And why at the beginning they are so similar?
What do you mean, in math?
Yeah, like in math.
So,
Before 2012.
if this was completely random, then the VAR shouldn't follow any pattern. Should be like up and down, up and down. We don't really understand what's happening, why 3 years in a row math got the hardest book. We talk.
So apparently they told me that during those years the blue book was the base one. They created the blue book to be the standard, and then they randomized the other ones. So the blue book should be the one that should be easier, but I think they didn't put the questions in the order that didn't make any sense. They made it the hardest one. So they designed the blue book to be the basic exam, and they randomized the others.
And we spoke to the people who are in charge of organizing this exam in INEPI, and we showed them these results, and they were as surprised as we were, because the idea of the forms is only to prevent cheating. The idea of the forms is not to create this difference between students. So when you compare students who got the blue book to students who got the gray book here, there's a 0.11 standard deviation difference, and that is very, very large for a standardized exam. And what's also interesting is that these differences are not only for math, that also apply for language, for science, and for history. But they are much smaller. Why? It's much smaller because time is more important in math than in the rest of the exams. And these are going to be larger because you take these two exams. Are they back to back? You have to do math and language at the same time, or are they? I think you have 5 hours to complete the two exams, right?
Why do they have people in the same room, so they don't want the order of the questions to be the same, so they can't look across?
Exactly. So that's what's going on here. Basically, this guy got the blue book, and he cannot copy to a guy who got the pink book because the questions are going to be in a different order. And that's.
So when you showed this to NEPI, did they go back to find all these people that took the blue books and award them a scholarship?
No, not exactly. Maybe that would be the first thing to do. I don't know. What they told us they were going to do is basically to make sure that the position of the easy questions across book is similar.
But largely in math. So what level of standard deviation is acceptable? Difference by book is acceptable in terms of
Different. So I have run the exact same thing using data in Chile, using a high school exit exam in Chile and using a high school exit exam in the Dominican Republic. And when I ran the exact same progression, I find no differences whatsoever across books.
Yeah,
so I think it's possible to.
You might expect some differences. The question is,
yeah, for example,
how much of a difference makes a difference?
less than 0.1, than 0.1 standard deviation. Like this year here. This year here, they have less than 0.1 standard deviation, so it's possible.
How much off is the blue? How many standards?
This one, this is 0.7 here, 0.7, 0.07, sorry, and this is 0.04. So it adds up to 0.11.
The ideal is 0.01.
The ideal is 0,
Less,
right?
Yeah, but less than 0.
Exactly. It's something that is not significant. For example, we observe some differences here, but those differences are not statistically significant. So they won't make much of a difference, right?
People at INEP, they were aware of that.
I don't think they were aware of that. When we showed them the results, they were quite puzzled. They were surprised, and they were not really happy. Because you're not supposed to give different exams to different kids. You're supposed to give them the exam that's the exact same in terms of difficulty.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, those are very good results. Congratulations, yeah.
They were very puzzled about these results.
When
We showed them last year, like August last year.
Was
August.
Chico there? Chico? Yeah.
No, I think it
Well,
was.
last year was, Ana Maria Inez.
No, he's from a little bit before her.
Oh, you showed it before?
A little bit before.
So that was cheap.
So it was
Yeah.
2016.
2016? I don't remember the exact date.
I don't know.
No, this happened in the time she go.
This
You
happened-
showed them? You showed them last year?
I think we showed them last year, 2017. Maybe it was Maria
Oh,
Elena.
that's Maria Inez.
Probably. I don't remember the names. Too many Brazilian names for it, so it's hard to keep track. So this is gonna be the first random variation. Okay, so we're gonna have the examination booklet have an impact on your score, and now we're gonna see what's the effect of your grader, the grader you're assigned to, on your score. Basically, the last part of the exam is an essay you have to write, and it's marked by 2 different graders. And graders are going to be randomly assigned to you. So my exam and Kawa's exam is going to be randomly marked by Martin, and then Leo's and Nano's exam is going to be randomly marked by Anna. And we're going to construct a leave one out instrument. This looks like a complicated formula, but it's super simple. It's basically what's the average mark your grader gave to everyone who is not you. So if me, Anna, and Luis were assigned to the same grader, that G for me is going to be the average score of Luis and Anna. You got it? So it's the average grade my grader gave to everyone but to me. Is it clear? And that's going to be a measure of strictness or leniency. So if the average grade that my grader gave is low, it means that my grader is very strict in marking exams. If the average grade he gave is high, it means that he's very lenient in grading exams. What should we expect? Since the assignment of graders is completely random, we shouldn't expect any differences across graders. But we do observe differences. I'm going to show you the difference later. But we're gonna observe very large differences in the average grades they give. So to wrap up, what do we have in the 0 stage? Basically, the examination book you get matters. And why does it matter? This variation is likely to explain by the position of the easy questions. I can show you those results later, but the interest of time, I didn't put them here. And also the assignment of the grader also matters and explains like 2% of the variation of your scores.
Let's see, like the graders are not assigned, but like the way they assign. Let me rephrase that. So there are 2 graders.
Yeah.
If I score high with one and low with another, I have a 3rd grader to prevent
Yeah,
this kind
exactly.
of this.
Yeah, but we're only going to have the 2 first graders you were assigned, because that's completely random. If you were assigned a 3rd grader, then it's not random anymore. So we're only going to exploit the variation coming from the 1st and 2nd grader you were assigned to in an instrumental variables framework.
Why is not random?
If you get a 3rd grader,
Yeah.
you're only going to get a 3rd grader if the difference between your 2 marks
Yes, but
is large.
you don't know to which grader you're going to be assigned.
Right.
So it's also random.
Yeah, but it simplifies everything for the estimation, just taking into account the first 2 graders, and you want to say something?
It's not random because maybe I have a kind of writing that everyone likes, so I'm very unlikely to get a 3rd grader. And maybe I have a kind of writing that some people hate and some people love, so you're more likely to have a 3rd grader. So the fact that I have a 3rd grader and I don't is not exogenous. So
You only get a 3rd grader if the difference in score between the first 2 graders
It's very
is what? How great?
how many points? Which is, I don't know how many
deviations.
1 standard deviation is 150 points, so it's like
So
0 point.
the 3rd grader's not randomly
No,
assigned.
we're only going to use assignment of the first 2 graders. That's our instrument.
But in reality, people that do have large differences in score get a 3rd grader.
Exactly. In reality, they do get a 3rd grader, but we're not going to exploit that. We're not going to use that.
Right, but in fact, it does affect
It does affect.
what happens
right? But we're not going to use that variation. We're going to use only the variation coming from the first two graders you were assigned to. You want to do something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, for the instrument, so you're actually taking the average for the two graders? Is that it, because that's that?
Yeah, so we're going to take the average of the two graders.
Oh, it does, sorry.
Yeah.
My only comment there is that if you have a grader who's like more willing to give better grades, you're gonna have a different probability of the children who are assigned to this grader to have a third grader not.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can take that into consideration.
Yeah, but then if you're assigned as third grader, and the third grader gives you a worse score, a better score, a worse score, then that's only going to change the power of your instrument. It's not going to change whether your instrument is exogenous or not. It's going to be a power issue, I understand. We can add the third grader and get more variation, but what we're exploiting right now is still completely random and exogenous. So okay, I show you the effect of graders and booklet on scores. And the question is now, how does this translate into differences in education? So Luis got the hard book, Anna got the easy book. Do they get any differences in schooling, in college education? So the first question is basically, how do we measure education? We can measure in an extensive margin way, whether you attended college or not, or the number of years you attended college, or we can measure also in an intensive way, margin way, which is what is the quality of the degree you attended. Maybe the book assignment affected Luis because he went to school, and Anna didn't. Or maybe the book affected Luis because he went to a better school. So we're going to have these two margins at play here. So this is
But you also change the major that you choose, right?
also could change the major you choose as well. Yeah, because you could have, say, a major has a very large weight in the writing part, and then you got a huge shock in the writing part, but you didn't get in the other parts. Maybe you're going to switch majors. You're going to say something, Martin?
I just wanted you to go back to the second reading.
To describe this?
Yeah.
So we're going to have, we need to define education. Education, we can define it in two ways. Maybe our instruments are going to affect you. How? On the margin of going or not going to college. Or maybe they're going to affect you in a different margin, which is this, in which college you go to. Maybe because you got a higher score, you're going to go to a better school. So we're going to have these two different margins at play.
Are you doing it within, isn't one of the margins which kind of program you go in?
Exactly. That's going to be measured by the intensive margin, which is what's the average entrance score of everyone who attended your same major.
That's the type
That-
of the program.
That's the type of the program, yeah. We're going to address it that way. You can do this program more multidimensional, where you have an unordered choice model where you can go to different fields, but this is...
The first one a mixture of program and university?
Yeah, it's going to be a combination of both.
Intensive margin?
It's going to be a combination of both.
Program and university.
Exactly. We're going to be measuring everything of the intersection of program and university.
Well, isn't that partially taste?
It could be taste. But the random experiment we have here is, I give you 0 points, you now go to university. I give you 100 points, now you go and choose university. If you have more points in the NA score, in the NA exam, you're going to be able to choose from more options. Why? You might be eligible for FIES, you can get a loan and go to a private sector, you might be eligible for ProUni, or maybe you got a higher score and now you can attend a public institution. Kawe, since he got 0, he's not very smart, then he can just go to our private institutions and pay it by himself. That's the random experiment. That's our ideal experiment in our heads. That's what we're exploiting
The
here.
only thing is that you really can't differentiate, when you do it this way, between whether a student attends a higher payoff program versus a higher payoff, higher quality university.
No, we're not going to be able to differentiate both.
Yeah,
Yeah, we won't be able to differentiate both. Our estimate is going to be a combination
you
of.
might be able to figure out the algorithm, since you have these random differences in
So
scores.
we can figure out the algorithm only for public institutions that use Sisu, because then you have a centralized admission system and you know how degrees admissions work. But for private institutions and for the remaining public institutions that don't use Sisu, we don't really know what their admission process is, so we cannot back out the
That's true,
algorithm.
but even if you have the public, even if you can derive an algorithm from the public institutions, you could argue that
Applies the same way
that
to.
applies, that you're basically
Yeah.
developing a choice function.
Yeah, we can. That's what we're doing now. We're sort of doing like a choice model to put some more structure to what we have, in order to be able to learn more. But now here I'm only presenting the reduced form without zero structure, only exploiting the exogenous variation in our instruments. But you're right, we could put some more structure and understand which margin this instrument is affecting. It's its degree, it's the institution, it's maybe the interaction of both. That's what we're trying to do in the future. So our first stage. We're going to do a projection of our instruments. These are going to be basically book dummies, whether you got the blue, the yellow, the gray, or the pink book in day 1. It's going to be the same, but in day 2. There's going to be a fixed effect of the grader you got. Sorry, this is going to be the average grade that your grader gave to everyone else, but to you. And these are going to be controls such as the examination room and your high school fixed effect. And we're going to project all of that is random into your scores. And then we're going to use this projected score, which is going to be capturing only this random variation from these variables here. We're going to capture that random variation. We're going to project it into your schooling decisions. As I mentioned before, we're going to have 2 different schooling decisions, the intensive margin and the extensive margin. And that's going to be measured by our variable W. So how does it look like? When we project the variation coming from the book assignment, only from the book assignment, we observe that there is a positive correlation with attending to college. So if you got a better book, then the probability of attending college increases, is larger, and the relationship is quite linear. It not only that increases the probability of attending college, it also increases the probability of attending a better degree. If you got a better book, then it also increases the probability of attending a better degree. But if you see the axis here, the increases are quite low. So if you got the worst book, you're going to go from 23.7% chance of going to college, you're going to jump to a 24.2. So it's very, very low. But what happens when we see the assignment of the grader? If you were assigned to a grader who marked on average everyone else with 500 points, this is a very strict grader, your chances of going to college are going to be 21.5%. And if you were assigned, you were lucky, and you were assigned to a grader who was very, very lenient, your probability of going to college jumps from 21.5% to 24%. So this huge difference in the probability of attending college is only driven by the grader you got. Bad luck, no, you don't go to college. You were super lucky, you went to college with a greater probability. So to make sure that the graders are completely random assigned, we run here a placebo test. What is this going to work? How this is going to work? Most of the students who are taking an A this year took it before last year and probably attended university last year. Many of them are taking an MY to get FIES, to get ProUni, or to switch to a different degree. So in this y-axis, we're going to plot the probability of having attended college the year before you took the exam. And here is going to be our graders instrument. Since these two variables are not correlated, we should observe a 0, and that's basically what we observe. The probability of you having attended college last year is completely unrelated to average grader, to the grader's average score that you got. Is this clear? I can explain it again. Sure.
So you only have the graders for 1 year, that's 2015?
Now we have it for 2015. We just requested for the rest of the years, starting in 2009.
You are getting the rest of it.
Yeah,
Let me say something about these years.
sure.
So we have a data set that is 2014 inadequate versus the 2009, 2010 innate. People took innate multiple times.
Exactly.
So I would say we only get about 40% of the people who took the inadequate in 2014 having taken the innate.
Yep.
And so these early years, it's true, and I think when you look at your variation on the booklets,
This one.
I think you had very different groups.
Of people taking these.
Yeah,
Yeah.
time might not have been a constraint for these early groups
Exactly.
because they chose to take the innate. After a certain point, I think it's 2011, everybody has to take the
Exactly.
innate. So now what you might be getting is variation because time becomes more of a constraint for people when you have everybody taking it rather than when you have a select
Yes,
group
sir.
who chooses to take it.
Exactly. That's going to be a concern for the books instrument, for the assignment of the book.
Right.
But for the assignment of the grader, which is where we got most of our traction, that's not going to be a problem.
But you only have 2015, you might
Now, it might be,
You might have a flat thing for the early
fingers
years.
crossed, we expect to find the same for different years. But I agree, fingers crossed, we don't know. Now, we don't know. This is for 2015.
I would predict
I agree.
that you might get a flatter curve in the early years.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
There might have been less variation, but you're right, maybe.
I mean, if it's the same,
I'm just saying.
For the
but
previous
you-
years-
You agree that on the booklets,
I agree on the booklets, and we can observe it here actually.
Good.
There's less variation in the first
you might
years
want to just take people
than in the last.
after 2000, you might want to, you might want to put a date, a time, a year in there.
Yeah, we can interact our instrument with the year.
Do a year fix with it.
Yeah, we can include it. Also interact the instrument with the year, and that's completely doable.
It's also true that the loans started kind of like in 2010, 2012, and that made NM even more important.
Yeah, more high stakes. Yeah.
There's a trade-off. We want people to make some money, like a long time ago, so that we can see if the labor market.
That's the trouble, yeah. The trouble is you're going to be weighted toward those early years in terms of your gains,
Yep.
your labor market.
Yeah, we can only wait for that. It's a matter of time.
Well, I think you have, nothing is perfect, so good.
I agree. Anna, you want to say something?
Wasn't there a previous loan system?
The previous loan system before 2010? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. So basically the main takeaway of this graph is that if you are assigned to a very harsh grader, your probability of attending college decrease compared if you were assigned to a very lenient grader. And these differences, as this graph shows, are completely random.
Why do you think, like, can we go back 2 slides? One more, yeah. Why do you think, like, we are not seeing a lot of action here? Because you show us, like, a huge difference between the blue book and the gray book, for example,
Because
If
for
you
the
do, like, a reduced form, just plug in the color of books in the
Yeah,
regression, you see the
the
same thing. no
the problem is that what matters for university access is the average of all your books and not only your math book. And when you average math with all your other exams, so here, for example, you got math, you got the blue book this year, and then the blue book in language was positive. So I'm gonna take an average of this that is negative with something that's positive. So it's gonna reduce the power of our instruments. That's why the effect is kind of mild for the books.
Sebastián, have
Yeah, maybe if we
you
look
guys
at-
looked at the application process?
So the application process, we're trying to get data of the application process that's
This
Census.
is how people apply.
How would you look at that?
Well, I'm sure there's information, just general information, not, you don't have to have empirical data, exactly how they took it, but
Yeah, so the
I just think to have some idea about how people apply, because I think it's important to sort of unravel a little bit the choice of program versus the choice of university. Because I'm sure people make those kinds of decisions, whether they want to attend a better university or attend a program that they want, or the program that they think will be a higher return.
when they make decisions, you have to apply, at least for the CISU, for all the universities that are in this centralized admission system, you apply for an institution and program at the same time.
Right.
And it basically is I don't know if a 5 days process, where you submit your options every day, and
Do you do so after you take the exam?
after you take the exam, you get your score, then the process starts, you submit your 2 of these options. Depending on your score, you're going to be assigned to one of these options. If you didn't, then you go to a second day, then you resubmit your options, and so on and so forth, until you get assigned to something. That data is very rich. It's called CISU data. It's owned by the Ministry of Education and not by INEPI. And that's why we don't have access to it yet.
Some universities in certain programs give their own exams still.
Yeah, so around 50% of public institutions have their own exams called vestibulares, but most private institutions also have their own exams. We could get the data, but then it would be basically requesting university by university their admissions data, and I don't know if they're going to be willing to share that
A lot of
information.
private universities don't require the MA
I'm not.
unless you want to get, then it's only for the scholarship.
So what most private institutions do with an A is that they want to advertise that they have high quality students. So if you go to high school in high score in A, they offer you fellowships and loans, so they can advertise them as better universities. So it's not really part of the selection process. It's going to matter for whether you got offered financial aid or not.
Just one question. During the admission process, is only the average score which matters, or
So it varies. For the admission process, it varies. The weight of the exams. Say you want to study medicine, they're going to place more weight in science and less weight in language. If you want to study like writing, you're going to place more weight in language. So it varies by university and by institution.
And that's going to affect the second part of your quiz.
Exactly.
Have you looked at it by that? Like looked at the effects just in the more technical degrees where math would have a higher
No, but we want to do that. That's part of free work. So let me give you a short overview of what we want to do in the future is exploiting financial aid data. So similarly to many other Latin American countries, there's a huge gap in who goes to college. For example, in 2013, only 50% of college students belong to the lowest income quintile, while 40% belong to the highest income quintile. As I mentioned before, FIES and ProUni programs constitute the main instrument for the Ministry of Higher Education in order to increase access and retention in college. And FIES is very, very large. It's basically 1/3 of the budget. And one question we want to answer here is, do they work? Do they have any effect whatsoever? We're going to be interested in 2 different margins. First, college access. If you got FIES, are you more likely to attend university? Second, if you got FIES or ProUni, are you going to perform better in the labor market because you attended university? How are you going to do it? We're going to do something very similar to the Chilean case. Let me walk you through the graph. So in Chile, you have to take PSU, which is sort of the same INA. And if you get a score above 450 points, you're eligible to get CAE, Crédito Conaval del Estado, which is a state guaranteed loan. And this is a paper published last year in the Journal of Political Economy by Alex Solis. He's a Chilean economist who's working in Sweden. And he shows that if you are eligible for CAE, then the probability of attending college jumps from 20% to 40%. So it's basically a 100% increase in the immediate college enrollment. What we have what's the idea? The idea is basically that these students are very similar to these students, and that the only difference is that these people here were not offered loans, while these students here, they were. So the difference in their college enrollment is only due access to loan. What's the research design we propose to Brazil? In Brazil, we have a very similar setting, but instead of having one universal threshold, every degree is going to have a degree-specific threshold. If you want to study biology in PUCI, the threshold for getting FIES is going to be, I'm making it up now, for 550. If you want to study engineering, the threshold is going to be 530. So you have one different cutoff for every degree. And we can use the same regression discontinuity technique that basically treats everyone who is to the right as treatment group and everyone who is to the left as control group. And we can estimate what's the effect of aid on college access and future earnings. The only problem of this, so if any one of you have access to this data, I'd like your help, is that ProUni and FIES data, we would need to use ProUni and FIES administrative data, but we don't have access to it. Why? Because this data is owned by the Ministry of Education and not by INEPI. And INEPI, they don't have this data. And if you want to do a regression discontinuity, you don't only need everyone who got FIES and ProUni, which is public, but you also need everyone who applied for ProUni and FIES, which is not public, which is going to be our control group. So we're looking forward to contacting anyone inside the Ministry of Education and who might be interested in working with us. I think evaluating these programs is very, very important because of all the money that is put in them. And the evaluation is, at the same time, super simple and feasible too. So this is all what I have to show you today. Thank you. Thanks for your feedback.